night begins not with a scream, but with a silence. A specific, heavy silence that settles in the woods, on the outskirts of a town called West Memphis, Arkansas, on the evening of May 5th. A predator's patience is a terrifying void, and on this night, that void was filled with the innocent sounds of three 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, their laughter a fleeting spark against the encroaching dark. They were last seen pedaling their bicycles into the tangled wooded area known as Robin Hood Hills, a place of childhood adventure that would within hours become a permanent scar on the American landscape. The hunter watched, a phantom in the growing shadows, his motives a locked box of incomprehensible cruelty. He saw not children, but components in a brutal ritualistic tableau. The luring was subtle, the violence that followed was not. The emotional cataclysm struck West Memphis, not as a single thunderclap, but as a slow, creeping tide of dread. It began with a mother's intuition. Pam Hobbs, Stevie's mother, felt the first cold knot of fear when he wasn't home by dark. A mother's worry became a neighbor's concern, which became a community's nightmare. The phone calls began to spiderweb through the town, to the Moors, to the Byers. The search party that formed was a testament to a community's heart, a legion of friends and strangers armed with flashlights and fading hope. They scoured the streets, the parks, the familiar hiding spots. But the boys were not in any familiar place. As night bled into a gray, drizzly dawn, the search narrowed to the woods. The first discovery was a chilling omen: 3 bicycles, lined up with an eerie precision, near the edge of a muddy drainage ditch. The silence of the searchers then was louder than any scream. And then, in the murky, slow-moving waters of the creek, the unthinkable was given form. 3 small bodies, brutally beaten, bound with their own shoelaces, submerged. The world of West Memphis, a blue-collar town built on the banks of the Mississippi, a place of simple truths and unlocked doors, fractured along a fault line of pure horror. This is the human landscape that was shattered. To understand the gravity of the loss, you had to know the boy. Stevie Branch, small for his age, with a gap-toothed grin, a boy who loved his dog and carried a cherished Ninja Turtles wallet. Michael Moore, the practical joker, a kid with a fierce loyalty to his friends, who had just gotten a new bike for his birthday. Christopher Byers, the energetic one, a boy who wore glasses and faced challenges at home, but whose spirit was unbroken. They were not just names, they were sons, classmates, friends. Their absences became gaping holes in the lives of those they left behind. In the eye of this storm was John Mark Byers, Christopher's stepfather, a larger-than-life figure whose volatile, performative grief would later become a source of intense scrutiny and dark speculation. He embodied the community's raw, unfiltered pain, a pain that was quickly curdling into a furious, desperate demand for justice. The pressure on the West Memphis Police Department was a physical force. They were a small-town force, confronted with a crime of savagery that belonged on the front page of a national tabloid. The maze of the investigation was chaotic, with few clear paths. The crime scene was compromised by rain and well-meaning searchers. There were no obvious witnesses, no murder weapon, no immediate suspects. In this vacuum, a single potent theory took root, fed by the national hysteria of the era: the Satanic panic. The brutality of the wounds, the bindings, the location. To detectives grasping for a framework, it all pointed to a ritualistic killing. They had their narrative. Now they needed their monsters, and the town provided them. His name was Damien Echols. In the paranoid climate of post-1980s America, his persona was a perfect catalyst for fear. He was the archetypal outsider. He wore black trench coats, listened to Metallica and Aleister Crowley in equal measure, and practiced a form of Wicca he articulated with an unsettling, quiet intelligence. To a terrified community, he wasn't just a troubled teenager. He was a symbol of everything they feared was lurking in the shadows. His methods were not of covert stalking, but of psychological defiance. He didn't try to blend in. His very existence was a challenge to the town's homogeneity. He was the quiet loner, the brooding intellectual, and the prosecution would paint him as a charismatic, sociopathic high priest of darkness. His closest friend was Jason Baldwin, a quiet, artistic boy who found solace in his friendship with Damien and in his rock-tumbling hobby. Where Damien was fire, Jason was shadow, loyal to a fault, and tragically swept up in the maelstrom surrounding his friend. And then there was Jessie Misskelley Jr., a 16-year-old with a tested IQ of 72, a boy from a broken home who struggled in school and craved acceptance. He was the weakest link, the one whose psychology made him vulnerable, pliable. The investigation's first major break, the pivotal twist that seemed to unlock the entire case, came from an interrogation room. On June 3, 1993, Jessie Misskelley was brought in for questioning. For nearly 6 hours, without a parent or a lawyer present, he was grilled by detectives. The session was not recorded in its entirety. Under intense pressure, his story shifting and contradicting itself, Jessie finally broke. He gave a confession. He implicated himself, Baldwin, and Echols. He spoke of witnessing Damien sexually assault one of the boys, of beating them, of holding them underwater. But his confession was a house of cards. He got the time of day wrong. He described clothing inaccurately. He said the attacks happened at noon, when the boys were in school. It was a mess of coerced facts and leading questions. But it was a confession. For the police and a desperate public, it was the master key to the maze. Their downfall was sealed by that single flawed statement. The arrests were made. The trials were a media circus, a chilling theater of the absurd where the prosecution's case was built not on physical evidence, but on a constructed mythology. Damien's interest in the supernatural was presented as proof of satanic devotion. Stephen King's The Stand was entered as evidence. The lack of physical evidence tying the three to the crime, no blood, no hair, no fibers, no murder weapon, was explained away by the cunning of the satanic cult. The intellectual puzzle was forced into a shape it did not naturally fit. In 1994, the verdicts came down. Jessie Misskelley was sentenced to life plus 2 40-year terms. Jason Baldwin was sentenced to life in prison. Damien Echols, deemed the sinister ringleader, was sentenced to die by lethal injection. As the judge pronounced the sentence, a chapter appeared to be closed. Justice, in the eyes of the state and a relieved community, had been served. But the story was only sleeping. The lingering shadow began to stir, fueled by a small, dedicated group of outsiders who saw the grotesque injustice. Documentary filmmakers, led by Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky, began to ask questions. Their film Paradise Lost: The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills exposed the shocking flimsiness of the case to the world. A chorus of voices grew, including celebrities like Eddie Vedder and Johnny Depp, who lent their fame and resources to the cause. The families of the victims themselves began to publicly doubt the conviction. Pam Hobbs, Stevie's mother, would later express her belief that the wrong men were in prison. The fight became a grueling, 18-year war, fought in courtrooms and in the court of public opinion. The central character was no longer the suspect, but the flawed system itself. The new investigation, funded by the defense, began to unearth what the original had ignored. Alternative suspects emerged from the shadows, their profiles far more fitting that of a violent, opportunistic predator than 3 teenage outcasts. The most compelling of these was Terry Hobbs, Pam's husband and Stevie's stepfather, a man with a history of violence, who provided a shifting alibi for his whereabouts that night. The climax arrived not with a bang, but with the cold, hard science of DNA. In 2007, after years of legal battles, new testing was performed on the evidence. The results were devastating to the state's case. None of the DNA, not the hairs found twisted in the ligatures binding the boys, not the genetic material under Christopher Byers' fingernails, matched Echols, Baldwin, or Misskelley. One hair, however, was found to be consistent with Terry Hobbs. The foundation of the conviction had crumbled to dust, faced with the prospect of a new trial that would expose the entirety of their botched investigation. The state of Arkansas offered a deal. In the West Memphis Three could maintain their innocence, but enter an Alford plea, a legal paradox that allowed them to proclaim their innocence. While the state treated them as guilty for the purposes of the plea, they would be sentenced to time served, and released immediately. It was a bitter victory. After 18 years in prison, nearly 2 decades of their youth stolen, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley walked out of the Craighead County Courthouse as free men. But they were not exonerated. The convictions remained on their record. The state had sidestepped the truth to avoid admitting a catastrophic error, so the official outcome is a legal technicality, a compromise that satisfies no one's thirst for true justice. The lingering shadow is the entire terrible truth of the case. It is the ghost of the real killer, or killers, who walked away. It is the devastating failure of a justice system that valued closure over truth. It is the life sentences served, not just by 3 wrongfully convicted men, but by the families of the victims, who have been denied the certainty of knowing who murdered their children. The full, unvarnished truth remains submerged, like the bodies in that creek, obscured by the mud of coercion, hysteria, and institutional pride. The case of the West Memphis Three is a permanent stain, a haunting American Gothic, that forces us to question, not only who is capable of evil, but how easily we, in our fear, can become its unwitting architect. If you found this story haunting, don't stop here. Watch our next case, where another hidden truth finally comes to light.